Well, the October numbers was a point in time because actually that data set was taken based on information from the 26th of September to the 9th of October, and that saw an increase in the unemployment rate to 5.2%, confirming what we know, that lockdowns cost jobs. What this new, previously unpublished payroll jobs data shows that the new hires in New South Wales have increased by 25% in the fortnight to the 24th of October. So it's post that jobs data for early October. It also shows that in Victoria, new hires are up by 15%, in the ACT 22%. And once these lockdowns end, the jobs come back, and we're very confident of a strong rebound in the labour market, that we can see unemployment get back to the fours, bearing in mind that it hadn't been under 5% for a decade. And this was really good news for the labour market, but obviously the Delta variant was a bit of an obstacle. But now that restrictions have ended, now that lockdowns have ended, then we can now see a strong rebound in the labour market from here.
So on that ATO information, you mentioned the state numbers. Across the country, the increase was by 13% over the fortnight to the 24th of October. How many jobs are we talking about? Are we talking about tens of thousands of jobs, and will that inevitably see the unemployment rate drop for November?
Well, we are seeing thousands of new hires across the economy, but also, importantly, we're going to see tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people come off 0 hours and back into work. We were starting to see that actually in the unemployment data in New South Wales, with more than 60,000 people coming off 0 hours and getting back to work as that state was on the edge of reopening again. So overall, we're going to see thousands of people get new jobs, and we're also going to see hundreds of thousands of people who have been coming off those 0 hours.
The other new story today, unpublished Treasury analysis showing that bank spending data has consumer spending now greater than what it was pre-pandemic. Will it be the consumer that drives this recovery into 2022?
It will be the consumer, it will be business, it will be a private sector-led recovery. We as the government are handing over the baton to the private sector to carry Australia's economy forward as those lockdowns have ended. Our payments were emergency payments, and once we got to that 80% vaccination rate, we could bring those emergency payments to an end. But the good news is that people are spending. We saw in New South Wales and Victoria $150 million extra being spent a day after the lockdowns had eased. This new Treasury analysis of bank data for the week ending the 7th of November shows that spending, for example, in New South Wales is significantly up, in Victoria is significantly up, and indeed 25% up on those pre-COVID numbers. So it is a positive sign that people are spending again as restrictions have eased.
One of the flow-on impacts of that, I guess, is a risk to inflation with the labour market tight as well. You met with your US colleague late last week. They've got their own issues, a 30-year high, in fact, in inflation. Does that inevitably have a flow-on here, and will it drive up, our own rates and petrol prices? Should people be worried?
Well, Kieran, the situation in the United States is different to Australia. In the US, inflation numbers, which, as you say, were 30-year highs and above 6%, saw 30% increases in energy prices over the last 12 months. That was the single largest factor that was driving these inflation numbers. There's also been higher food prices. So if you strip out energy and food prices, then that number had been reduced to 4.6%. Yet here in Australia, our underlying inflation rate is at 2.1%, which is at the lowest end of that band that the Reserve Bank of Australia sets of between 2 and 3%.
So there's no direct flow-on effect here? The RBA won't have to move earlier in terms of lifting rates?
Well, they're different scenarios. Here in Australia, there is spare capacity. in our economy, particularly in our labour market, and that gives us a bit of flexibility to respond. There will be a normalisation of monetary and fiscal policy over time. That is, obviously a result of the economy coming back to life after the lockdowns. But the situation in the United States and Australia is different. There is, though, one pressure that both our countries are facing right now, and that is supply-side constraints. What we saw during the pandemic was the demand for goods go up as the ability to consume services went down as a result of the health restrictions. Restrictions on your travel, restrictions on enjoying hospitality, restrictions on other service-related purchases, whereas goods went up. So we've actually seen a nearly 10% increase in import volumes through the pandemic. This is putting pressure on our ports, and we've seen around a doubling of freight costs as a result of what has been experienced through the pandemic. And that is a cost to business that flows through to inflation, and that's being experienced in the US as it is here in Australia.
The net zero target, the modelling was released on Friday afternoon. One key element that you in fact flagged prior to the announcement of the policy was that access to capital markets would see the cost of capital, and we've got a number on this now, don't we, of about 100 basis points, 1% increase on the cost of capital if nothing were to be done on this front.
Well, Treasury did some analysis and provided input into that Department of Industry modelling, and what Treasury's central scenario was that you could see a 100 basis point increase in the cost of capital as a result of not being part of a broader effort to reduce emissions in the way that we are indeed part of with our net zero by 2050 target. Obviously, access to debt and equity markets is important for business, but it's also important for governments. We have around half of our government bonds purchased by overseas investors. We have $4 trillion of foreign investment, and about 20% of bank borrowing is done offshore. This can all flow through to the cost of capital here in Australia, and that was the central scenario that Treasury analysis showed, that a 100 basis point increase in the cost of capital as you went from going to your preferred credit providers to your second tier ones, that would be a consequence of inaction. But we have taken action, and we are taking action with response to reducing our carbon footprint and being part of this global consensus to reduce.
That would be the cost of doing nothing.
Reduce emissions by 2050.
You're not worried about the blowback of voters in your seat who are concerned you haven't made a commitment to an increased target for 2030, for example, something Boris Johnson has been pushing nations to do?
Well, Kieran, electors right around Australia can see our genuine commitment to reducing emissions, and that is obviously been proven by the fact that we're down by more than 20% on 2005 levels. That can be seen in our technology investment roadmap, which is focusing on hydrogen and carbon capture and storage, soil carbon, new battery technologies, solar cell technologies. I mean, 90% of solar cells for commercial use around Australia use Australian use around the world use Australian technology. It's a remarkable statistic, and it goes to the very concrete actions we've been taking here in Australia to develop the best technologies and export them to the world. So there's a very strong track record of reducing emissions, as well as a forward-looking commitment to that 2050 target and the plan to get there.
Finally, Matt Keane said to me on the afternoon agenda program during the week that his government, that he had signed a COP26 declaration to phase out zero-emission cars by 2040. Will the federal government allow that to go through, or will you seek to block that?
Well, we've focused on practical initiatives, Kieran, to invest in electric vehicles. That includes their charging stations and a range of other initiatives that we've undertaken. Matt in New South Wales will have his own targets, his own policies. We at the federal level will again set Australia up to reduce emissions consistent with that net zero target by 2050, and a whole range of other initiatives through the Clean Energy Finance.
So the federal government wouldn't block that New South Wales target?
Well, I can just tell you what we're focused on here federally, and that is getting to net zero by 2050, which I think is a very significant step forward, and a very important point that Matt understands and that I understand because we're both treasurers, is that there is not a binary choice between having a stronger economy and having a smaller carbon footprint. Our emissions, as I said, are down by more than 20% since 2005, yet at the same time our economy has grown by 45% and an additional 3 million people are employed. So I'm pretty upbeat about the prospects for Australia in terms of reducing emissions and growing our economy. You can start to see the labour market data where the jobs are coming back after lockdown. We've seen business confidence up quite significantly. We've seen consumer confidence up in 8 out of the last 9 weeks. We've maintained our AAA credit rating, one of only 9 countries in the world to have such a credit rating from the 3 leading credit rating agencies. Money's been accumulated on household and business balance sheets through this pandemic, which is now being spent through the economy. So I look at the Reserve Bank and their forecast for next year, Kieran. They've upgraded growth from 4.25% to 5.5%, and I think your viewers have a lot to look forward to in 2022.
Treasurer Josh Frydenberg, thanks for your time on Sunday Agenda. Appreciate it.
My pleasure.